Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Joy.
And of course, if you dare to join us on Twitter, you can. You just have to use the hashtag #TheDrum, and we are also on Facebook. Now, troubled accounting firm PWC has been forced to sell its government contracts arm in an attempt to salvage its brand. It follows revelations that tax accountants used privileged government information to attract new business elsewhere in the company. PWC has sold off the public sector arm of its business for just $1 to investment firm Allegro. And while it admits over 100 employees will continue their work at the new firm, it has assured a New South Wales parliamentary inquiry today it will only transfer staff who have been cleared of any wrongdoing by an ongoing review.
We deeply regret the breach of confidential federal tax policy information that happened around 8 years ago, and I deeply apologise for that. We've failed the standards we set for ourselves as an organisation, and I apologise on behalf of our firm. It's appropriate that we follow due process. Once that due process is finished and the investigations are complete, we've engaged 2 external law firms to help us with this investigation. We will name anyone who has done anything wrong.
Are any of those 63 people where an investigation is still ongoing going to be moved to this new entity, Bell?
No one who has done anything wrong in terms of our investigation outcomes will be moved to this entity, no.
So you can't guarantee it right now, but presumably before it happens. Okay.
Sorry, we're still working through the details of what is going to be in and out of the new vehicle.
Acting Chief Executive Kristen Stubbins told the inquiry the firm didn't begin investigating the tax leak scandal until weeks after a tranche of emails were released showing the extent of the problem. Nikki Hutley, OK, let's cut through all of this. We've got apologies, inquiries, pending investigations. Is this going to work?
Look, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think there's a whole load of breach of trust that has happened here. Yes. And the big question is, governments are now saying, A, do we need consultants at all? Well, I think the answer is clearly yes to that. You cannot, no matter what anyone says, there are niche areas of expertise they will always need to look to external advisors for. So even if they pull back a significant amount, there will be the need for consultants. The question is, how much do they trust PwC will go through a cleansing process? By selling off this particular arm, or giving it away, essentially, they're trying to separate this group from any other group. And they're also saying this group only works on government, so therefore there is no opportunity for them to mix with others who potentially could misuse that information. So it's sort of saying, it's almost saying we don't trust ourselves without separating ourselves to do the right thing. But I think from a corporate point of view, strategic point of view, it's probably the only thing they can do at this point in time. And let's face it, we're heading into an economy is turning down. We're talking about tens of thousands of jobs that will be lost over the coming year or 2 years. You want to save all the jobs that you can. I'm sure the majority of the people that we're talking about are people of very, very high integrity. I know lots of people who work at lots of different consulting firms, and, you've got to be careful not to tar everybody with the same brush. The question is, governments are looking at this whole issue of consultants quite differently. Everybody's been quite shocked at how this could have happened and the extent to which it might be happening both there in other departments and indeed in other firms. So there is still a lot of rebranding. It's not as simple as here we sell it off, we're telling you everybody's kosher and just, let's all get on and happily pretend nothing ever happened. I don't think it's that simple.
Can we just go to that question that you brought up? So the question of rebuilding trust. When we've got to cover up over a period of time, when offences occur over years and they're not investigated promptly, everything seems to be lagging. How can we be certain that a culture has been that enabled that has been fixed?
Look, you hope that. My view is always an organisation is really the leadership tells you a lot about it, and it doesn't matter whether it's your kids' schools or a giant corporate entity. The CEO at the time and their language, what they do, you have a deal of confidence. They've brought somebody in who's is a person that seems of high character, who's well regarded throughout PwC globally, presumably a person of high integrity, who's going to come in and say, right, we're going to clean this out. They want to do it with due process, which is fair enough. But you do, But if you want to look at how quickly you can repair a reputation, just look at Steve Smith, and Sandpaper Gate. He's been acting captain of the cricket team. I mean, this might seem quite a frivolous example, but it is true. You think about his career seemed over. You think about the allegations from the Financial Royal Commission and we still haven't cleared up all that.
Isn't that part of the problem, though? Yeah. It's not about bouncing back. It can be almost a culture of impunity if things happen and then you come back without.
Well, there is the idea, of course, of too big to fail as well, and I don't think that is relevant in the consulting industry. To be truthful, they will have to prove themselves, and they will have to prove themselves very hard, and it will be painful, and they will have lost a lot of business along the way. But if they can prove themselves, they will be able to rebuild over time.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's interesting, this idea of being given the privilege and the opportunity to prove oneself. To prove oneself changed, you have to be given responsibility. And, the examples you gave there, we know that white men in Australia do get a lot of impunity. They do get a lot of reputational rehabilitation. We know that on multiple levels and structures. But with this one, I just go, I don't know that we should give them that opportunity to prove themselves. If we've got this culture of covering up and, these failings happening, where were the whistleblowers? Where were the call-outs? Why should we believe that there's integrity in anything that comes out here on in when there hasn't been over this expanse? And I just get a little bit sick of people in substantially privileged, powerful positions in this country just being given, let's give them another go and let's let them, prove us wrong. But it would be on your point about, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, this idea of all consulting being cut off. That would be a real shame because it does have a place. But given that, look at the standards we hold public service workers to. They can't even tweet without being pulled in. We have such rigid and restrictive expectations on public service staff, and yet we've had this, whatever this is, culturally or, where was the oversight? Who allowed this to happen? How did this happen for so long? I think is a question we need answered.
It is, but don't forget that the people that are moving, these businesses are incredibly siloed. They'll tell you their collaboration is, it runs in their bloods, but it's not. They are siloed and, having worked in 2 Big Four firms, not that one, but, you don't necessarily know what's going on. And just because you're a partner, there are hundreds and hundreds of partners in these, you don't necessarily know. So you're right, stuff from the top, they should have known and something should have been done. But you can still have that group that is moved to the side and have reasonable confidence that those people should be okay. Should be, yes.
Michael, let's talk about the Big Four and what the consequences are for the other 3 and the consulting industry more generally. If we have PWC's response saying, the way to handle this is we'll just separate the private from the public when we have 3 other big firms doing and still merging them, right?
It's a creative solution, isn't it? But you have to wonder whether the government is going to then demand every consulting firm does the same, and you wonder why it hasn't been done almost now. I mean, it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? If you want to quarantine the public side of the business from the corporate side of the business, then have 2 separate entities, because the temptation clearly has been there for a long time for people to use the knowledge they gain in the public side of the business with the corporate side of the business, and the temptation for some has obviously been too much. I'd reckon the government would be looking at this pretty closely and would think it's not a bad idea.
And the other thing, of course, Gus, is that this is a reflection on the bureaucracy's reliance on private sector advice, which hasn't been static. It's not just about, you were talking about niche areas of expertise, Nikki, but it's not just that. It's kind of ballooned over a period of time, hasn't it?
Yeah, despite the comedic images of the bureaucracy on Utopia, I mean, the vast majority of our public servants are effective and work incredibly hard. But we've seen a succession of cuts, efficiency dividends, etc., through across a couple of governments now, and I think we've reached a point where these federal departments have been excessively cut and are now excessively reliant on this external help. So I think the pendulum needs to swing back, and I think the other structural thing that we've been looking at is this part of these big firms are governance and compliance, and some of them are consulting. Often they're running compliance and consulting into the same business or department, and I just don't think that can continue. So the spotlight that's on PWC needs to be extended more broadly. I think we're going to see under the Albanese government some returning of some public service capacity. The question is how much they can afford. I've heard some of these firms are earning over $1 million a day just in the Department of Defence alone. So if you extrapolate that times 4, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of federal public servants that you can have. Now, I agree with Nikki. There are just some things they might have a modelling capability or an area of a policy advice that the federal department may not need to own. But frankly, there's a lot of just arms and legs being hired. It's really labour hire to sit back in the building. So I think this is an opportunity to relook at a whole lot of things.
Do you agree with that, Nikki? Oh, yeah, sorry, Michael.
Sorry, no, I just think the point is that this whole thing is going to change now. There's just no way that the government can continue with business as it has been over the last 10 or 15 years, using these companies in the way that they've been used. And some change will have to come about because of this. So, the millions and millions of dollars that the government spends on outsourcing these things, surely some of it's going to have to be put back into reinvesting in the public service, and the relationship between the companies and the information they get and how they use it is going to be very highly scrutinised from here on, I would have thought.
It's a fairly substantial investment to, fill up hollowed out areas of the public service, though, isn't it, Nikki?
Look,
of course.
It's a huge amount, and there are just, Gus is right, bums on seats, and Defence Department's probably the biggest example of that, where, people don't want to get in consulting, juniors say, whatever you do, don't get your defence clearance or you'll end up stuck in, doing essentially a Defence Department bureaucratic job because they can't find enough people to do the job. And that's a very different thing from the sort of specialist niche consulting services. They're two quite separate issues. And obviously the basic capabilities, we should be able to put those bums on seats so that the government can do its job day to day without relying on external, just bodies.
But what kind of safeguards do you think the other giants in the industry can put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Look, it's pretty simple. They already have in place all sorts of rules because they are audit clients.
So it's compliance.
When you audit one particular company, you then are not allowed to provide any advisory services. And this is why I was so shocked when this happened, because when you work with one of these firms, if you want to do a project, if you get approached by a client and say, can you provide me this advice? You don't just go, oh yeah, I've got the skills to do that, I can help you with that, I'll go along. You have to go through a huge risk and compliance process to make sure that, it's in the company's interest for you to do it, that the client is on the level, that there aren't any conflicts of interest. So the fact that this could happen, it goes back to your point, Amy, about the culture there. Something went very, very deeply wrong.
It took the Senate. It took a Senate committee 6 or 7 years after the event to really uncover this. So this idea that the firm can heal itself and bring this to light, it didn't happen. And more power to the Senate, frankly. This is why we need things like Senate committees and we need the media and other things, because we're just not finding out about these things otherwise.
Michael, we had today, speaking of senators, Labor Senator Deborah O'Neill saying this is a phoenix operation, what's being created now. Do you think this is indicative of the approach that's going to be taken?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be giving much latitude at all anymore. I think they will use this as an opportunity to rework the relationships, to reinvest, as I said, in some key areas of the public service. But none of this is going to be able to happen quickly either. This is the result of probably 15 years of hollowing out certain areas of the public service and hiving off those areas to the private sector. It's going to take a long time to rebuild that expertise, and clearly there is, as someone was saying earlier, there are still going to be many areas where outside advice is going to be called for and should be required. So, but I do think this gives an opportunity for the government to have a really good look at the relationship, to rework it and redefine what the limits are for everyone.
OK, now to Queensland, where there are new reports out today about teenagers being left alone in cells for months while on remand at the Cleveland Youth Detention Centre in Townsville. Guardian Australia reports an Indigenous boy with an intellectual disability was subject to a regime